It's called The Harbinger, the ancient mystery that holds the secret of America's future. This is one of those programs you do not want to miss. Are there strange omens from ancient texts that determine the fate of thriving nations, specifically us? In a moment, Jonathan Cahn joins us as we talk about The Harbinger on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. A year ago, I had Jonathan Cahn on the program as we talked about The Harbinger, and things have changed over a year. Truly a frightening story. He's the author, of course, of that bestseller, The Harbinger. He's an internationally recognized authority on end-time prophecy and leads the Jerusalem Center, the Beth Israel in Wayne, New Jersey, president of the Hope of the World, by the way, which is an international outreach program. Jonathan's teachings, his messages are heard all around the world. Always a pleasure, Jonathan, to have you on. How are you?
Great to be back, George. I'm great.
And you're still doing some work for WND, WorldNet Daily, right?
Yeah, continuously. Yeah,
super.
Yeah, with Joseph Farah. Sure.
Joseph's a great guy.
Yes, and funny too.
It's funny, and
and radical.
He understands. He co-produced with you the DVD part of the Harbinger, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He did the Isaiah. It's called the Isaiah 9:10 Judgment, and it's kind of the Harbinger in its factual form, with like a documentary form, and it's on DVD. And they told me that's become the number one faith video in the world. So yeah, it's the Isaiah 9:10 Judgment. And it's so people actually are seeing the Harbingers. And
how did the book do over this year?
Well, the book is, when I first spoke with you, it was new. It just came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has been on the New York Times bestseller list every week since. It has never left, and it's one of the longest lasting of the New York Times bestsellers on the list. It's gone over 1 million, and it just keeps spreading. It's gone to Capitol Hill. We've just gotten reports of senators reading it and members of Congress reading it. So it just keeps spreading.
Well, things are happening fast in this year. Not only has the book done well, but this planet has changed dramatically, Jonathan. Have you seen that?
Yeah. I mean, and it's been, there's a real restlessness. I mean, in America and around the world, people who are into prophecy have been, there's been buzzes over many different things we can touch on. But it's, things have not gotten better. It's a continual sense of really foreboding.
I used to hear the old saying, it's a harbinger of things to come. Tell me about the mystery of the Harbinger and how you picked that title.
Yeah. The Harbinger, well, it's the ultimate thing with the Harbinger is, could there be an ancient mystery, 2,500 years old and a bit more going back from the Bible, that actually lies behind everything that's happening in America, from 9/11 to the collapse of the American economy, something that's so specific that it actually gives the words that American leaders speak before they say them, I mean, down to the exact words, actually gives exact dates of some of the really most, traumatic events in the last 10 years, down to the hours. And, the ultimate thing is God sending a word. There's this mystery that's in the Bible that happened to ancient Israel, and it's replaying now, and it's replaying kind of eerily and, with precision. It's not something just kind of general thing. It's happening, and since the book came out, and since we last talked last year, it's actually coming true, and there's been more happening, and we'll get to it later, but there's more that happening that even kind of shocked me, but it keeps on happening. So it is this mystery that happened in the last days of ancient Israel. And, this is a nation that knew God, was blessed, had prosperity, and then turned away. And as it turned away, there were warnings given, and then these harbingers, or, when you say that, like the title, I didn't realize that a lot of people don't know what the word means. Harbinger is a warning of something to come. It can be a good thing, but
it can be
usually when you say a harbinger of things to come, often it's a warning. In this case, it's a warning of judgment or warning of destruction. And these are the 9 harbingers that appeared in the last days of ancient Israel. And the eerie thing is the same 9 harbingers of warning of national destruction and judgment that reappeared in the last days of ancient Israel and then led to destruction are now reappearing on American soil.
I was going to say, they repeat themselves, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, and ways that are, I mean, it's eerie because nobody's trying to do it. I mean, nobody's trying to put it together. I mean, and it's not that anybody is consciously coordinating this. It's just happening. And some involve inanimate objects. Some involve American leaders. Some have taken place and manifested in New York City. Some of it happened in Washington, D.C. Some have involved the president. And some have involved the entire economy and Wall Street. But nobody is trying to put it together. It just each one of them just happens. As it's kind of like replaying this drama that happened 2,500 years ago, but now in modern America.
Jonathan, can you give us just an overview of these 9 harbingers?
Yeah. Well, the first harbinger that happened, really the sign in the Bible of the first warning is when this first strike happens on the land, when the nation's hedge of protection is lifted up temporarily, and this is a warning, and it happens years before, in a sense, the destruction comes. And that happened in Israel. It happened in 732 BC. There was a strike on the land. It was actually a terrorist attack, and it happened, and then it was over, and then the kind of nation hung in the balance. It was a wake-up call to come back to return to God. And with Israel, they didn't. And so here these 9 harbingers appear. With America, the day that our national hedge of protection was lifted was 9/11. And this is the beginning, strange thing, because when that happened, comes the beginning of the harbingers. One of the harbingers is called the breach. That's that opening strike. The second in overview is the terrorist, and that this is actually literally a terrorist strike or terrorist happening. The third is the harbinger of the bricks, fallen bricks, and we can get into some of them. The fourth is called the tower, and we'll get into. The fifth is the stone of judgment. The sixth is called the sign of the sycamore, and another sign of national judgment. The seventh is called the Erez tree, and the eighth is actually a vow that is proclaimed over the nation, and the ninth is a prophecy that's proclaimed. Now that's just a real broad overview, but we can touch on.
We'll get into all of them.
Each one of them are happening in America.
How do they tie in to the Book of Revelation? How do they tie in to end times?
Well, one of the things about the Book of Revelation, is that and this has touched prophecy people, experts for a long time, is that there's no real clear mention of America. I mean, there are those who have ideas. There are those who look to the signs of, talking about the eagle or Babylon and all that. But there's no real clear mention of America, which what that means is that America cannot be leading, cannot be the head of nations it is now in the last day scenario. And what the harbinger is doing is really kind of connecting the dots of saying what's going to happen from now and then, where America is going from, still the head of nations to a fall or a collapse, and something that is, following an exact progression that really the steps are all there. I mean, not that there's not a choice, but what it looks like is that, this is the thing that the very events that will go from where we are here to a world without America as the head of nations.
This slippage, can it be stopped? Can we reverse things?
I believe it can, but I believe there's hope. And people say, is there hope for America? And I say, if there was no hope, I don't believe there'd be any harbingers. And what's the point of warning if there's no hope? Or what's the point of having an alarm if there's no hope of saving? That's the whole point of the harbingers, and the whole point of the book, The Harbinger. That's the whole thing. So. Yes. Now, if you ask me, if I look at the way it's going in America, I would say, in my own natural thinking, no, it doesn't look like there's a lot of hope because there's a real major slide. At the same time, nothing's impossible with God. So, there can be revival, there can be a turning back. But does it look like it? No. But is there hope? There's always hope.
Jonathan, between the first harbinger, the breach, and the prophecy, how much time is in between?
Well, interesting question because, and this is, we can touch on it, that, since the book, it's still happening. There's at least 2 harbingers that are still, in a sense, developing, which I'll share later. But between I would say it was a period of several years, from 9/11 being the very beginning, and then several years. And I'll tell you, because since one of the harbingers is this tower going up at ground zero, that's not finished. So technically, it's not even finished. Technically, you're talking 11, 12 years.
So from when it started to where we are, could be another 10 or 12, right? Could be 20.
Well, you mean like till the next shoe falls, or the next event happens? Well, okay. That's a great question. In the case of ancient Israel, when the first harbinger happened, when the strike happened, till the nation's destruction, it was about 10 or 11 years. The same pattern of this warning and then the final thing happened with the nation of Judah, which is also recorded in the Bible. Same pattern. That one was 19 years. So, there's not a formula, but there is a very exact progression. And in both cases, it wasn't relatively really long before that final thing happened. So you have 10 on one hand, or 10 or 11, and you have 19 on the other.
How many civilizations went through harbingers? Just one, the ancient Israelites?
Hard to say, because people have said, is there another case where you have all these things happening? And I have not. I mean, these harbingers. There's always signs. There's always signs of decay or signs of a nation heading. But these particular, almost could say supernatural, because they're so specific and so precise. I have not seen another example so far. I studied history. I've not seen it so far between, two. One is ancient Israel and one is America. And I'm open to seeing it. But, there are always warning signs. But these specific kind of eerie patterns, no, I haven't seen it.
At all?
No, not these. Not these, ever. Yeah, that's and I wasn't looking for it, George. Originally. Now, I wasn't expecting this thing. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't trying to write a best-selling book or anything. It just it came, and it was as if the thing had to be written before I ever started typing. And when I started typing, and I never wrote a book before, it flowed out as if the book was already written.
Jonathan, these 9 harbingers, where did you find them? How did you know about them?
Well, I was, I live across the Hudson, so when 9/11 happened, I could see it happen.
Oh yeah,
could see the smoke. In fact, my wife, she wasn't my wife then, but my wife was supposed to be there at that moment, when that was going to happen, and her last minute, her plans were changed. And same with other people that the same story happened. A lot of people that I knew were supposed to be there, and their plans were changed at the last minute. But I was literally praying in the seeing the smoke and all that, and I was led to this passage in the Bible that speaks specifically about this first warning of the nation of Israel before its destruction. And at that point, I wasn't looking for it. It just kind of opened the Bible, and it just was led there. But I saw the connection immediately. I didn't see the specific. The verse that became the kind of decoder of the harbingers. I didn't see that right away, but that was in that section. There was a guy named David Wilkerson. He was a famous pastor, and he was in New York City. And that week, he gave him a word to his people, and he said, "There's a word that God is giving him to America, and about this." And the word he gave was the same exact verse that became the verse of the harbingers. And he didn't see the harbingers happening. A lot of that happened after. He just got this supernaturally. He said it, and he's the other one I know. But then later, I'm standing at the corner of ground zero, and something is directing my focus to an object there, which was this tree. And something said, you have to seek this out. There's something there. And as I did, this thing started opening up, and it became like the first puzzle piece of this mystery that just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until I was blown away by it, literally. And I shared it to the people, at the Jerusalem Center. They were blown away by it. And they said, this thing has got to go to the nation. It's a word that has to go. It's not from you, Jonathan. It's just got to go. And then only a little while later did I start writing it. And that's when, again, I don't know how to write. I just started typing, and literally flowed out.
Let's talk a little bit about Revelation in the Bible. Get your interpretation of that first.
The entire book, or the overall?
Just the overall.
Yeah. Well, Revelation is focusing on the last part of history. It's the tribulation period. Some will even say it's the 3.5 year end or kind of half tribulation period of the final, the apocalypse. And a lot of people, when they say apocalypse, they don't realize what that means. Apocalypse is another way of simply saying the title of Revelation, which, apocalypse means simply the unveiling. God, there's an unveiling of what's happening. And it gives a scenario where Israel is the center of world conflict, which of course it is, and that's also, so consistent with Bible prophecy. It speaks of a scenario where the culture has gone away from God and is evil is rampant, and where man has the capacity of destruction, mass destruction, and involves everything from there are things identified with China, and again the focus being the Middle East, but the final cataclysm, and even it also speaks, of course, of a one world state or one world culture, and many of these things we're moving towards, or either we're heading that way if we're not there. But that's why people are always fascinated with this book, because it's the final thing. But never before have there been things in place like, again, in Israel and other existing after 2,000 years, and many other things that have never been in place that are now there in the 21st century.
Were these prophetic people time travelers, remote viewers? How did they know what they knew?
Well, the Bible says God is beyond time and space, and so He is very able to break that barrier that we know and knows the end from the beginning and reveals it. And you look at these people. You have like a fig tree farmer, Amos. You have a shepherd. There's no way they have any concept on their own to know what's happening. I mean, and even with our computers, we can't determine what's going to happen 2 years in advance with human history. But here they're seeing it, and actually that's what first got me. It's the fact that they could tell these things, see these things, because it was revealed to them not by their knowledge, but by one who was beyond time and space. I was an atheist when I first picked up, a book on prophecy, and that's really what led me to believe, is because there was no way I could explain this away.
There's also science behind it, Jonathan. You know that?
Well, God is the God of, He created science, so yes, absolutely.
I want to get into, of course, some other things, including the mystery ground, when we come back in a moment. We'll go through these 9 steps now, a little more specifically. But the book is still available, as you said. So are you writing another one? What's new with you there?
Well, they just came out. The Harbingers everywhere. Because there's been a real demand of people wanting to get deeper into it. They just came out with a Harbinger Companion, which I helped with, obviously, but it's going deeper into the mysteries, and it actually has pictures of the Harbingers and photographs and maps and charts. It's very real stuff. So it's more the factual part. So that the Harbinger Companion just came out, but that's not a sequel. I do have in my head or in my spirit a whole kind of another thing to go with this, but I've been led to hold off right now because the word, this message is still being digested. It's still going very strong, and I'm feeling I have to wait for the next message before until this thing is really fully gone forth.
I think so too. Why are people so fascinated with prophecy?
Well, we all want to know what's going to happen. I mean, everybody, we always want to know what's going to happen. And then there's a real sense, and there's a sense in America, and there was a sense at 9/11, that we are in trouble and we are in danger, and where we are heading. And the Bible, gives exact things on this. And again, that's what won me over. And that's what I was fascinated with. It was prophecy. So. The fact is, when you have something and when it actually comes true, I mean, there's a lot of things where people say things and they certainly don't come true. But when you have something that does, that's, there's something in control of everything. And that's worth more than all the newspapers and all the internet, media in the world.
Jonathan, we're going to come back, talk more about the Harbinger. We'll go through these 9 Harbingers when we roll right back on Coast to Coast AM. And you've been invited to watch our television program, Beyond Belief, 10 days free to take advantage of watching that and the past programs and also all the many videos that are available. Simply go to GaiamTV.com/George, GAIAM TV.com/George, or go to our website, click hosts, and you'll see the TV icon and take advantage of the 10 days free. But you'll really enjoy, based on the comments I get, beyond belief. Back in a moment, more with Jonathan Cahn as we talk about the Harbinger, right here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back, Jonathan Cahn. Well, Jonathan, the information you have is just so incredibly important. You've got me on the edge of my chair, literally. And, most of the time I do this interview standing, but, I'm really at the edge here. Let's talk a little bit about the mystery ground. What is that?
The mystery ground is first of all, a principle in the Bible that something that happened concerning ancient Israel, again, that there's a ground of earth where they dedicated Israel to God. It was the Temple Mount. That's where Solomon was up there, and he gathered the nation together, and he prayed for the future, and they dedicated Israel to God. Now, years later, centuries later, finally, when the judgment came, when the destruction came, the destruction returned to the same ground, the Temple Mount, where the nation had been dedicated to God, and it was in ruins. And the message was to the nation: return. You've broken this covenant. Return. And so, what does that have to do with America? Well, in America, there is a day that parallels this dedication, and it was the first day that America existed as a nation as we know it. It wasn't 1776. It was 1789, and it was the day that Washington became president. For the first time, we had a fully constituted government with a president according to the Constitution. April 30th, 1789. Now, on that day, Washington is sworn in the capital city, and he gives a prophetic warning to America. It's embedded in our first day. And basically what he says is, in effect, is that if America ever turns away from God and the ways of righteousness, the blessings of America will be removed from the land. And we're actually seeing this warning come true. He gives the warning, and then he and the entire government of America, the first cabinet, the first Congress, walk on foot to a place that's appointed to pray and dedicate America and its future to God. So on the very first day of America, the entire government gathers to do this, to dedicate the nation to God. So where was it? Because if we can find that, that is the dedication ground. That's the consecration ground. Where did it happen? Well, it happened in the capital city. But the capital city was not Washington, D.C. The capital of America was New York City. Where in New York City? It was in Lower Manhattan. Where exactly? They went and they dedicated America on a specific spot of ground, and the ground that they dedicated America on was ground zero.
No way.
America was dedicated to God at ground zero.
Amazing.
That is the consecration ground of this nation, and the destruction returned to the same ground as it did in ancient Israel. The same thing, the call to return. And actually, a shockwave.
That is shocking.
Yeah, and actually, Ground Zero was actually church land. It was part of this church where they dedicated America to God, and this shockwave goes forth on 9/11, and it strikes another place. It strikes Federal Hall, the place where Washington gave the warning. And what would happen if we ever turn away from God? And one of the things he talked about was the removal of protection. And it strikes Federal Hall, which is really the foundation of the government, and puts a crack in America's foundation. So everything, we didn't realize. The nation was drawn back. Our eyes, when we were looking at Ground Zero, we were all drawn back to the place of the consecration where America was dedicated to God, the same biblical principle.
Was this known to the terrorists back at 9/11 time?
No. I am sure, I'm convinced that they had no idea. First of all, they weren't reading the Bible. They might have been reading the Quran. They weren't reading Isaiah, which is the key to the Harbingers. So no, they definitely did not. And yet, like everything, George, with everything with this, it's like everybody is replaying this without meaning to, and nobody could have put all these things together. The way it happened.
And there are no coincidences. This just doesn't just happen by luck. There's got to be some meaning behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the key things in prophecy. Absolutely, and that goes with the other things as well. For instance, one of the harbingers. And all the harbingers are kind of, in a sense, decoded by this one verse in Isaiah, which was Isaiah 9:10, which is the verse where Isaiah the prophet is recording what Israel did, how they reacted to this first warning strike, this first really terrorist attack. And the reaction is this one verse where they said, instead of kind of returning and being humble and coming back to God, what they did is they made this vow, and the vow is a vow of defiance. And what they said is, they said, the bricks have fallen in the attack, but we will rebuild with hewn stone. The sycamores have been cut down in this attack, but we will plant cedars in their place. So what they're doing, in effect, they're telling God that, listen, and telling man, we're not going to turn back. We're not going to change our course. We're going to keep on going, and we're going to come back even stronger than before on our own strength and against God. So they're going to continue. And this is ominous because it's going to set the course of their destruction. Well, if you look at that vow that Isaiah records they made, you see the harbingers. And for instance, one of them, it says the bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild with hewn stone. And what they're saying is, hey, we're going to rebuild stronger than before, and where the bricks fell, we're going to rebuild with these massive stones. The word in Hebrew is gazit stone, which means literally a massive rectangular block of stone that is cut out of the mountain rocks to show like we're defiant. We're going to bring it back to where the bricks fell, and we're going to show everybody we're going to build higher with these, taller, bigger, and better. So what does this have to do with America? Well, after 9/11, here's what happened. I mean, for this harbinger, this is in the book. It's the fifth harbinger, the stone of judgment. Is that somehow this gazit stone would have to manifest and would have to be linked to 9/11. After 9/11, the people in New York go up to the mountains of New York. They quarry out a massive rectangular block of stone. It's a biblical gazit stone, 20 tons of rock. According to the mystery, this harbinger would have to be brought to the place where the destruction happened, where the bricks fell. They bring it to New York City. They bring it to Ground Zero. They lower the stone down on the pavement of Ground Zero. They have a ceremony around the stone with leaders, American leaders, the mayor, the governors, all there, and what they do is they all pronounce vows of defiance over the stone. So we're going to come back stronger. In fact, if you look at the commentaries on Isaiah 9:10, the commentators will say the nation does this. They lay the stone in the spirit of defiance. They keep using this phrase, spirit of defiance. Well, the governor of New York, he vows over the stone, and he says, we are doing this in the spirit of defiance. And the same exact words.
Same words. How does this happen?
Because it has to happen. I mean, I would say it's not anybody trying to. That's the whole point.
It's destiny, isn't it?
Yeah. There is this aspect of that. I mean, I have no question. At one point, you could share a story of how the book became a book. I mean, it was just a total destined thing. Absolutely. And that's the thing. It's nobody putting it together. Nobody.
I heard rumors it had something to do with the Super Bowl.
Yes.
I have friends in high places.
Yes, I think you're going to like it when I just
Okay.
But I don't even watch sports. I mean, that's really destiny because with that. But yeah, and it goes with and the next thing when you look down the ancient verse, this oracle, it says then the sycamores have fallen or been struck down. This is the sixth harbinger. It's a sign of national judgment. And it happens not just there, it happens in other places of the Bible. It's a sign of a nation being uprooted if it doesn't turn back to God. And in this strike that happened on Israel, this warning, the sycamores of the land were uprooted. So they said the sycamore has been struck down. So for this harbinger to manifest, it would mean that somehow that linked to 9/11, the sign of the sycamore struck down would have to be there, somehow linked to this strike. The thing is, though, you don't. If you're looking for trees, you don't go to New York City. That's not the first place you go. The terrorists aren't trying to fulfill Isaiah, as you mentioned. They don't know this, and the Hebrew sycamore doesn't even grow in New York City. So what happens? An eerie thing happens because for this to happen, it would have somehow the sycamore has to manifest. Eerie thing. The last moments of 9/11, as the last tower's coming crashing down, it sends forth a shockwave and a beam, and it strikes an object, and the object it strikes happens to be a tree. The tree happens to be a sycamore. It's the American version of the Hebrew sycamore. Just happens to be growing at the corner of Ground Zero. The sycamore has fallen, struck down, the sign of biblical judgment or national warning of judgment. They put the sycamore on display in New York City. They have no idea the meaning. They call it the sycamore of Ground Zero. And then the next thing in Isaiah is that it says that it says the sycamores have fallen, but we will plant cedars in their place. And this is another act of defiance, where the people are saying, hey, we're not going to be humbled. We're going to take another tree, put it right where the sycamores have fallen, and we're going to show you we're not going to be humbled. And the tree that we're going to put is a stronger tree than the sycamore. And in the Bible, in English, you read cedars. We'll replant the sycamore with cedars. But in Hebrew, the word is erez. And erez can be a cedar, but it also can be a spruce. It means a pine or Panacea evergreen tree. Well, what does this have to do with America? Because for this to happen, this is the seventh harbinger, there would have to be an act, almost like a ritual, of replacing the fallen sycamore with another tree that has to match up with a biblical tree. And so what happens? 2 years after 9/11, a tree appears in the sky at the corner of Ground Zero, and it's being lowered down by crane to get into an exact spot of earth. And the earth that they're putting it in is the exact spot where the sycamore of Ground Zero stood. They are performing an ancient, really Hebrew act of replacing one tree with another kind. They put it down. They have a ceremony around the tree. They call it the Tree of Hope. It's a sign of, again, we're going to rise up stronger. And what kind of tree is it? Well, the tree that comes down is a Panacea tree. That's the definition. It's a pine tree. It's a Erez tree. It's the same tree of judgment that was in Isaiah in the sign of the Harbingers. And nobody, George, was trying to do that because somebody just donated the tree. That the terrorists could not have aimed for that sycamore. I mean, everything just falls.
How bizarre. Now, did you hear the story about President Obama's tree in Israel?
Tell me.
He brought a magnolia tree for Shimon Peres. They had it planted at Perez's residence in Israel. And as soon as the president moved on, they uprooted the tree to check it for pests.
Now that's real or that's a joke?
They say it's going to be returned if it passes the tests. It could take months.
Boy.
It's bizarre. The tree will be dead by then.
Oh, my goodness.
But again, you're talking about a tree. Here we are.
Well, yeah, and in the Bible, and we're going to see one of them when we get into the next part about really also what's happened since, that the tree is actually very significant as a symbol of a nation in the Bible. So it is very significant, and you have two right here. And then it gets even more eerie because, and this is what stunned me, because when I was being led, when I was standing at Ground Zero, I was immediately led to Isaiah 9:10, but I had no idea what was going to happen at the end of this when kind of this stunned me, and that is the eighth harbinger is that a leader of the land has to actually make this vow that was made, because unless the leaders did it, it's not going to determine where the nation's going. The leaders are significant.
They have to say it.
Yeah, and so it had to be said by leaders, and it had to be said in the capital city, because that's where they would have said it, made the pronouncing. So here's the harbinger. The eighth harbinger is the vow that it would have to be an American leader representing America would have to make this exact vow, a vow of defiance, pronouncing judgment on America, and do it linked to 9/11 and in the capital city. But what American leader in the right mind is going to pronounce judgment on America? Certainly not one who's running for running for office. Well, 3 years after 9/11, on the anniversary of 9/11, an American leader, very famous, Senator John Edwards, gets up in the capital city on September 11th, and this is the third anniversary, and he's before a congressional caucus. He gets up, and out of his mouth comes the ancient vow of pronouncing judgment on America. He says, this is the word for us. And out of his mouth, he says the same exact words that the leaders of ancient Israel said that led to their destruction. And he speaks, the bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild. Just the whole thing. I mean, and I got to tell you, George, this was not a famous verse. And in fact, almost, even Bible students didn't know this verse. Out of 30,000 verses, he says the verse that's pronouncing judgment on America and linking it to 9/11, and the verse is about an attack, and he's saying it, and not only does he say it, but he builds his entire speech around it. He goes on to say, we're putting up the cedars and where the sycamores fell. He has no idea that actually he's speaking of all the harbingers and has no idea that they're actually real. I mean, he's speaking figuratively. They're actually real. And it gets even more intense because the day after 9/11, when most of us were in shock, we didn't know this happened, that the American government gathered on Capitol Hill to give the nation's response to the world. And so they gather, the Senate, the House, and one man is appointed to give the nation's response, and that is Tom Daschle, because he's the Senate Majority Leader, and the Senate is representing the nation. He's representing the Senate. He gets up on the floor, and he gives the nation's response. So this is very critical, because when it happened with Israel, the response was recorded by Isaiah. It became a matter of national record and prophetic. So here, America's going to give the response. So he gets up on the podium, and before the entire U.S. Congress, he gives the response, and at the crescendo of his speech, he says there is a passage in the Bible from Isaiah that I think speaks to all of us at times like this. And then out of his mouth on the Senate floor, the floor of the House, he says he pronounces the ancient vow of judgment. The bricks have fallen. We will rebuild. He speaks of the tree that is struck down. He doesn't even realize there's an actual tree that's just being discovered that day. He speaks of the stone of judgment that's going to go up. That's going to happen 3 years after. It's like prophecy. He speaks of the replacing of the one tree. He speaks of all the harbingers. He has no idea what he's saying.
And it sounds like all the harbingers have been met, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, and yes, and they're continuing, yes. And here's the very day after 9/11, and it's like he's prophesying it. And you speak about prophecy, and we're speaking about predestination and how does this happen? Well, here's someone he doesn't even realize what he's doing, and people say, well, how can he do that? If that's the case. Well, interesting, because in the Bible there's an example of Caiaphas, who's a leader,
yeah.
And he says something. He says there's one man who has to die for the nation, and literally the Bible says he didn't know what he was saying, but he was prophesying of basically the death of Jesus. And he doesn't know what he's saying, but it has like a double meaning. And so it says he did this because he was in the office. It's like he represented the people. Same thing with Daschle. It's an unwittingly prophetic statement from Capitol Hill. He represented the Senate. So it's an eerie thing that people can even speak prophetic things without realizing what they're doing. And it would come true. That's the thing. What Daschle said would come true, because a lot of people, we thought, like after with 9/11, people were flocking to pray, and we thought, well, maybe there's a revival, but there wasn't, and it was all sealed in a sense on that day on the floor, and it became now the ancient response of Israel to its attack has now become the response of America, and that sealed the destruction in Israel, and it's part of the annals of Congress. It's right there. If you look there, you'll find Isaiah 9:10.
Amazing story, Jonathan. Truly amazing. Stay with us. Going to come back. We'll talk more about prophecy. It's the Harbinger. Later on tonight, we'll take your phone calls right here on coasttocoastam.com. To me, it sounds like most of these harbingers have already been met. I'm George Norrie, back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And we're talking about prophecy, the Harbinger with Jonathan Cahn, and we'll come back and talk more in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, welcome back to Coast. Jonathan Cahn with us. Jonathan, as we look at these various signs that are out there, are you convinced the clock has started?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When this pattern happened in the Bible, I mean, it was like a clock. With that first warning strike was really the opening of the clock, and was the moving forward of it. Once it happens, it's, there's a progression, and the progression. If you look at, there's old commentaries in the Bible that say this, that give the same thing. There's a progression, and we as America are moving from the progression from 9/11, because the harbingers aren't the end of the story. They're really like the beginning of it, and they're moving from the first shaking to a second shaking. And so, yes, it's kind of, there is a progression, and not to give formulas about how long that is, but the progression is there, and it starts with that moment. Absolutely, and it's more than once in the Bible, and that's what we're witnessing now.
Okay, now, are our leaders, Democrats, Republicans, are they destroying America?
Yes.
Putting it simply, right?
And I'm not speaking about everyone, and I'm not saying that this is a willing thing, or necessarily that people are meaning to, but if the leaders have a real responsibility, and when you look at the destruction of Israel, which is the pattern, the leaders made a big difference, in that they are, determining the course of the nation, and if they determine the course of a nation away from the ways of God, the ways of blessing, then they are inadvertently leading the nation to destruction. Absolutely.
Let's talk about the economy and some of the signs that you see. You call it the second shaking.
Yeah, and here is the pattern. And here is, in a sense, really the clock and the progression. That the first shaking is something that is a physical thing. It touches buildings, literally. The second is going to literally strike at American power itself. And the pattern in the Bible, and the pattern that of judgment in a nation is, and you see it again and again, is that if the first shaking does not, wake up the nation, does not lead it back, then there will be a second shaking. There will come a second. I mean, there's a host of commentaries on Isaiah 9:10 that say that's exactly what the progression is, and that's what's happening. And so here we have the second shaking that comes, and we left off where we were standing on Capitol Hill, in a sense, on the day after 9/11, and we see this leader pronouncing this vow. Well, it's about 7 years later, the government, and this kind of goes with what you just said, the government rushes to New York City, the Treasury, emergency meeting, and they meet with the leaders of Wall Street, and they make a decision, and the decision is going to actually trigger the collapse of the American economy. They come at the weekend. When the weekend's over, the entire economy is going to be crashed, including the world economy. And it's a decision that they made on that Friday. And interesting, because when they made that really fateful decision where this kind of house of cards collapsed, it was the anniversary of a particular day. It was on the anniversary, the 7th anniversary of the day that the vow of Isaiah was proclaimed from Capitol Hill. They make that decision, and it crashes the economy. And actually, there's a biblical principle that even the first of shaking causes the second. We won't have time to go into it, but actually the seeds of this economic collapse, and we're still in the shadow of this, the seeds of it were actually sown at 9/11 and in response to it. And there's a whole kind of stream of biblical mysteries and keys in this. I can touch on just some. One is called the Buttonwood mystery, and that is this: that there's a pattern, and there's a key in Scripture that when a nation is under judgment, that God says, the Scriptures say, I will lay bare the foundation. I will expose it. In other words, the thing which the nation rests on will be exposed. Its power will be exposed. Kind of like a house being brought down to the foundation. Well, what was the foundation of America's financial superpower? It happened in the 1700s. There was a secret meeting in New York City among the merchants of New York City, and they got together and they formed something. They signed a covenant, and the covenant was called the Buttonwood Agreement. And what that was is that was the beginning of Wall Street as we know it. The Buttonwood Agreement formed the Buttonwood Association. The name was later changed to the New York Stock Exchange, but originally it was called the Buttonwood Association. And why was it called Buttonwood? Because it was signed. The covenant was signed under a particular tree. This was the beginning of America's rise to superpower as we know it, financial, and the beginning of Wall Street. So here, what was this Buttonwood? The Buttonwood, this tree, was a particular kind. It was the sycamore tree. And so here you have the symbol of the sycamore tree. The beginning of America's rise to financial superpower happened under the sign of a living sycamore tree. On 9/11, the symbol of the sycamore tree reappears, but in a different form. It's struck down. And here is the symbol in the Bible. If a living tree marks the beginning of America's rise to financial superpower, what does a struck down sycamore tree mean? And after 9/11, they take that sycamore and they make it into a statue. And they take the statue and they put it not on Ground Zero, but they put it on a different street. They put it on the end of Wall Street. So if you go there today in Wall Street, you'll find this symbol of this uprooted sycamore. Now remember, Wall Street is named after Wall Street. Really, it means Buttonwood is another name for it. Is the sycamore place? It's the Sycamore Association. And here you go there and you find a symbol of a dead sycamore, uprooted sycamore tree. What does it foreshadow? In the Bible, these are biblical symbols. Foreshadows the fall of American superpower.
It's amazing tie-in.
Yeah, and it and even more. Now this one was stunned me. I mean, and that is this thing called the Shemitah, or in the book it's called the Mystery of the Shemitah, and
that sounds Hebrew.
Yes. Yeah, it almost sounds Yiddish, but yes, it's Shemitah, and people, there are Bible students who know that from what basically, everybody knows about the Sabbath day, but every seventh year was a Sabbath year, and that the name of that was the Shemitah, and so every seventh year they had a rest, no buying, no selling of the fruits of the land, basically this economic cessation, and it was supposed to be a blessing. It's a Sabbath year, but. Well, there was one thing that happened on the last day of this Sabbath year, and it was the last day. It was called Elul 29, and this was the final day of the Shemitah when all the nation's debt is wiped away, people's credits are wiped away, the financial accounts are wiped clean of the nation. Now it's supposed to be a blessing, but the thing is, when Israel turned away from God, this blessing comes back at them as a sign of national judgment. It becomes, in a sense, a curse. When Israel was later taken into captivity, called the Babylonian captivity, the land would lay rested. They would be there for 70 years for the years of the Shemitah that they didn't rest. So this Shemitah becomes this sign of national judgment of a nation that is turning away from God, driving him out of its life, and putting money ahead of God. And it specifically strikes a nation's financial realm. Now, what does it have to do with America? Well, America's not under the law, but as a sign, here's where it comes. The key of the Shemitah, keep in mind, is this 7-year cycle, and also this day called Elul 29 when the financial realm was wiped out. So now we talked about the first shaking, and we talked about the second shaking. The first shaking is 2001. The second shaking is 2008. That's a 7-year cycle.
That's right.
Between the two. When did the collapse of the economy happen? Happened in the month of September. That's 7 years to the month of 9/11. When exactly it happened on the second week of September. That's 7 years to the week of 9/11. When America was commemorating 9/11, the 7th anniversary. On Wall Street, the second shaking was being set in motion, and it gets more exact and amazingly exact, because what was the greatest day of the collapse? And it actually was the greatest collapse in Wall Street or American history. And that morning, George, when they opened up, they ring that bell. They rang the bell, and the bell would not ring. Even Wall Street took it as an omen.
Yeah.
The entire collapse there, the greatest collapse. So when did the greatest collapse of American history?
And now look at it.
What was it?
Now look at it. It's over.
Yeah.
It's going through the roof.
Yeah. Well, it's now. There's several years later. Yeah, and that's another thing.
Until 2015.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So here is the greatest crash happened at the end of September. And the thing is, as it did, when did it happen? It happened, the greatest collapse happened on the biblical day of the Shemitah, the day appointed to strike the nation's financial realm in the Bible, the exact day, down to the exact hours, the last day of this 7-year cycle, the exact day, and here the financial realm is wiped, the accounts are wiped, the Great Recession begins, and all this, and then, if you go back 7 years, because it's a 7-year cycle, from the very day of the greatest collapse in American history, go back 7 years, and you'll find it brings you to September 2001. You got 9/11, but you have something else. You have the other greatest collapse in American history, and the other greatest collapse up to that day happened in September 17th, and that's 7 years just about, but if you strip away the Western calendar, because the mystery here in the Bible, Shemitah is based on the lunar Hebrew calendar, strip it away, the other greatest collapse in American history happened on the exact same biblical day of the Shemitah, the day appointed to strike the financial realm of a nation that is driving God out of its life, and that wipes away the financial accounts. So the two greatest collapses, nobody could have put this together. Nobody. I was stunned when I saw this, because you think that the economists or somebody would say something or know this. They each happened on the exact same biblical day. They each happened 7 years apart, according to this mystery. They happened 7 years to the day and to the hours apart. And not only that, only one of these days, this Elul 29 days, in 7 years can be the actual day. Well, both of them, each of them happened on the once in 7 year day. So in Israel, you had Orthodox Jews who were commemorating this day, symbolically, wiping out their accounts, while all across the world, from Wall Street, the accounts of the world were being wiped out, starting with Wall Street. And so, nobody on earth could have put that together because, it involves every transaction, and this went down to the biblical hours. I mean, this is, and it's absolute fact. And the other thing is that there's a strange thing because, the sign of the Shemitah, this is all revolves around the seventh year, the number 7. Well, interesting thing, could there be like fingerprints of this kind of mystery here? And if you look at the crash of 2008, and on that day, and you find the crash, how much of Wall Street was wiped out? 7% was wiped out.
Which is
7.
huge.
How much? Yeah, and how many points were wiped out? It was 777, the sign of the sevens. And when you go back to 2001, how much was wiped out? 7%, the exact same number. In fact, I'll share something that's not in the book, but just for what it's worth. But interesting, because if you take the moment of that 777 in that greatest crash when it's all finished, and you go back 7 years, we already said it takes you to the exact crash, the other crash, to biblical years. Then you go back 7 days from that, the 24-hour periods, and it'll bring you to 9/11. If you go from one period, from the sundown to sundown, it brings you to the Hebrew date 9/11. And if you go from the close of this is 4 o'clock and the crash, go down 7 hours, it brings you to the hour of 9/11.
So let's talk about 7 years from now.
Well, that's the question, and people ask what's going to happen, and the next Shemitah happens in 2015. Actually, the Shemitah year happens 2014 to 2015. The culmination is 2015. Now, people ask, does it have to happen like this? And I haven't been led to say something has to happen, but I would say have your eyes open for this. And the other thing is that when I did look back, even before this, when I went back into American history from the time of the Harbingers back, there is a parallel. There is something on many of these 7 years where you have the economic, plunge in some way. Now, there's no period where you have it so exactly as what you have with 2001 and with 9/11 and then the economic collapse. There's nothing like that. So for that reason, I can't say it, but I can say I think it would be wise to watch.
Be careful. So what are the signs, Jonathan, when we get close, which means we've got about a year and a half, maybe less, but what are the signs that we can see that we would be able to say, uh-oh, it's happening again?
Okay, and again, I haven't been dogmatic about that. It has to, but I would say that, one is, if at that point you see this boom in Wall Street, which we're seeing, in a sense.
And we're seeing
another bubble, or, a house of cards, and, at the same time seeing the signs in the financial sector, which is what we saw in this first one, which really like a house of cards, where things were just not lining up, including the debt. Which is, by the way, George, one of the very clear signs literally laid out in the Bible of a nation under judgment is a nation under this shadow of debt.
Yes.
And that's another sign of this whole thing, which has mushroomed. And we went from the greatest creditor nation to the greatest debtor nation, And so, all these things, if you see the volatility, if you see the imbalance in, what is looking like a boom, and yet all these signs that we saw in this first collapse, I would say, take some steps if that's the case.
And if it's 2 for 2, why can't we just simply believe then it'll be 3 for 3?
It could be. It absolutely could be. The only thing that stops me from being dogmatic,
you don't seem too confident it's going to happen again.
Well, it could very well. The only thing the only thing is I know that God doesn't, just when you think there's a formula, God does something else, But the other thing is that it's happened. It happened based on in American history. I've seen this pattern, but it's exact when you come to 9/11. It could very well. I just don't want to put something more than I want to say be aware of it, but I don't want to be dogmatic, because God has a way of getting out of boxes.
Well, that's true too. And you say that this has happened every 7 years since 9/11. Had it happened every 7 years prior to 9/11?
Well, when I looked at it, I actually saw that there is a parallel. For instance, one of these years goes to 87, where you had the crash under Reagan. You had this crash. Then you go back and you go to 80, you have another recession. Go back, you have 73, another recession. I do see a pattern there, but nothing is as exact or precise as, amazingly, as what you saw in the last years, where the greatest crashes happen down to the hours. That's why I hold back from being dogmatic. But there's something there.
What are the blue moons? Blood moons, rather.
The blood moons are, and now this is not from me or the Harbinger, but to mention that the blood moons are that there are those who have looked at the book of Revelation, and it talks about the sun will be turned to darkness, the moon to blood before the great day of the Lord. Right. And also in Revelation it says the earth, the moon became like blood. So there are those who have looked at that and they say, well, the blood moons appear during the eclipse of the moon. And so what they did is they found, when they looked through NASA, they found that there's only a few times in history where you get this kind of cluster of lunar eclipses and solar eclipses, and also when they appear on Hebrew holidays. And so, one of these years was 1492, which is a very significant year for America and for Jewish history. Another one was 1948, which is certainly it was the rebirth of Israel. That's also significant. And another one was 1967, which is Jerusalem. So all these things are prophetic. Now, it did happen 3 other times when it's kind of harder to kind of correlate that. But the question is, when's the next one? Well, the next one is the year 2015.
Yep, here we are again.
Yeah, so that kind of and again, I'm not being dogmatic with this, and this is this is another thing that's not the Harbinger, but it does kind of correlate that it does go to that 2015. So again, I'm not saying it, but interesting that's when you see it again.
All right, stay with us, Jonathan. More to come right here on Coast to Coast AM. Jonathan Cahn, the Harbinger on Coast to Coast AM. And on Wednesdays, we sound off. As a matter of fact, you can too. Send your sound off to editorial@coasttocoastam.com. Make it about a minute. Put your name and phone number in there, and we might call you to record your sound off.
This is Martin from Maryland, and this is my sound off. All around the world, there is a group of people, men and women, who are controlling things behind the scenes. You can call them the elders, the Illuminati, or the New World Order elites. But whatever you call them, these are the people who really control things behind the curtain. They are the big money people. They decide and decry the fate of nations. They have billions of dollars. They are the money elite. They decide if the stock market goes up or down. They decide which countries get aid and which ones don't. That decides whether those countries join the first world or wallow in poverty. They put leaders in power and promote ideas in the media that they want people to believe. So if you're ever wondering what's happening in the world, who's in control, just know that in cities sit the elders around tables smiling as they control world events from their hidden chairs of power. This is Martin from Maryland, and that was my sound off.
And welcome back to Coast. Jonathan Cahn with us, of course, and we're talking about his work, The Harbinger. So you are convinced that we are in end times, that this clock is ticking, Jonathan?
Absolutely. The Bible gives very clear signs. One is that when you see Israel come back into the world, that's the first. That's another, in a sense, starting of the clock. When you see Jerusalem back in the hands of Israel, another one. When you see man's knowledge increasing, these are all biblical prophecies. Man's capacity to destroy the world. When you see a moral decay or apostasy on the scale we're seeing it, again and again, and several things. I mean, also deals with, Europe and China and all these things in biblical prophecy. But that was the first thing, George. And I was an atheist. When I was 8 years old, I became an atheist. So it was biblical prophecy where I just could not argue it was coming true.
8 years old, you're an atheist?
Yeah. I was raised in a synagogue. I'm Jewish by birth. I believe in Messiah, Jesus now. But the thing is, I didn't see the power of God. I heard about God moving and speaking and to the prophets and all, but I didn't see it there. So I became an atheist when I was 8, and then when I was about 12, I said, this atheism doesn't work. There's got to be a reason. There's got to be more. So I started seeking every kind of book on everything from UFOs to Nostradamus to religion to science. And one day I picked up a book that, turned out to be The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, which is all about prophecy, and all the prophecies of the Bible were coming true. So, it turned my head on this. I started telling my friends about it, and I started watching their lives were changing because of what I was telling them, but I knew I wasn't right with God. And so, I was a teenager, I had a rock band and, the whole bit. And so, I knew it was right, but, I knew I had to follow God and give my life and get right, but I didn't want to do it because I thought, you become a monk and that's the end of your life. So I made a deal with God. I said, God, if you give me a long life, I'll accept you when I'm on my deathbed. So what happened was right after that, I almost got killed twice. And the second time, I was on a Ford Pinto crossing a train track at night, and I saw this light. It didn't look like it was moving because it was the train coming head on. I wanted to make sure there was nothing, there was no train, and I'm literally on the track. And I thought maybe I'm too close. Maybe I should back up. So I try to back up, but now there are headlights in back of me, so I back up about a foot. But I thought it was fine. But I was in the path of the train. The train came, plowed into the Ford Pinto, became like aluminum foil. And I just called out to God. And at that moment, the car was demolished, and I didn't get a scratch. So I said, okay, God, you're getting my attention. And, can we renegotiate that deal? So I said, okay, I'll accept you now when I'm 20. So on my 20th birthday, like a man because I thought I was going to get killed. On my 20th birthday, I went up a mountain, didn't know what I was doing, went up a mountain, knelt down, and said, Lord, I'm yours. And that's how it began. That's
changed your life, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I thank God for that train. Without that train, I don't think I would be where I am.
These events that begin to unfold are uncanny. They're predicted. Why, though, are they in these symbols, like the sign of the sycamore, the stone of the judgment?
Yeah.
Why are they in hidden away like that?
Well, I think, if in the Bible, God uses symbols again and again and again. And by the way, nobody's asked me that question, but it's a biblical answer because because God always uses these. They're called prophetic signs. I mean, he calls, for instance, the prophets to take a clay jar and smash it, or he says, look at this tree and look at it wither, and so he uses these prophetic signs all the time because on one hand they're very, they're very, they kind of mark things, they kind of burn in your mind once you see them. And at the same time, it's open, just like the parables. If your mind, your heart's open, you see it. If not, you don't. And so he always speaks in this way in the Bible. And one of the things that again, I wasn't looking for anything. I mean, I just kept stunning me. And after the Harbinger came out, it continues to happen, and where there are things that happen. And my wife told me something. I said, I don't believe it, and I wrote it. One of the things that, and talking about it like being the principle of predestination, or the principle of also making something obvious. I didn't realize this. This is after we spoke last year. I found out that millions of Americans were actually shown this connection that was in the Harbinger before I even wrote the book. And I had no idea. There's something called the 1 year Bible, and that is where every day you have a kind of section of the Scripture to read. So every day has a date. Now it's been out. The 1 year Bible is famous. It comes out in King James, all the different versions of the Bible. And if you go, and anybody listening right now can do this, if you go to any 1 year Bible called the 1 year Bible, it doesn't matter what version, but open up to Isaiah 9:10, the Harbinger Scripture, this key thing. You open it up. If you look at the top of the page, a date will appear. The date will be September 11th in every every one-year Bible.
Uncanny.
Yeah. Every one-year Bible. All across America, George, millions of Americans on September 11th every year were opening up to Isaiah 9:10, the Harbinger scripture, and it was identifying, this is about the first strike, it was identifying it as September 11th, the first strike of attack on the land, warning of judgment, all the things of the Harbinger was all identified to millions of Americans as September 11th, and it came out before 9/11. So this was there for years, identifying in every Bible that 9/11 was the beginning, was the strike. All these things were there. I had no idea of it. And the only reason I found out was that after the Harbinger came out, we got flooded on September 11th with people saying, "Do you know what's in this Bible?" Because for the first time they saw it because of that. So, God can make something obvious, and yet you don't see it.
No, not at all. Tell us about the mystery of the three witnesses. What is that?
Well, yeah, one of the principles in the Bible is that when judgment is decreed or sealed, there must be two. It says 2 or 3 witnesses. That's in the Old Testament and the New Testament. It must be 2 or 3 witnesses of judgment. Now, here, or the connection with Isaiah 9:10, not even counting what I just said, but an American leader giving this pronouncement of America as under judgment. We saw it with Tom Daschle. That was on the day after 9/11. That's the first witness. Then we saw 3 years later on the anniversary, we saw it with John Edwards, the same thing, and each of them pronouncing Isaiah 9:10 linked to 9/11, not knowing what they were doing. But could there be a third witness? And the answer is yes. And the third witness is the President of the United States, is Barack Obama. And that is, in his first major speech, really his first speech as president, he goes to Congress. This is in the midst of the second shaking now, and that's why he goes there. And if you look at the vow of Isaiah 9:10, and you look at what the commentaries, how they put it together, how they sum it up in modern English, the way they sum it up is simply this. So if you're sycamores and cedar, but to put it in our lingo, it's simply this. Number one, we will rebuild, the nation's saying, and number two, we will come back stronger than before. Barack Obama gets up there and he gives a speech, and he makes the center of his speech is, he's talking about the economy, it's kind of a strange thing to say about the economy. He says we will rebuild, we will come back stronger than before. America, he says the same thing that doesn't really go with the economy, yet all over the world it goes, the words we will rebuild, which is the central declaration of Isaiah 9:10, makes the headlines, sums up the speech all over the world. If you had typed into the internet before the speech, you typed in the word simply we will rebuild, on the first page of results, you would have gotten Isaiah 9:10. That's how much those 3 words are linked to that ancient vow. But once the president started speaking, his words all over the world on the internet started replacing the words of the ancient Israelites. It literally took over the words, literally replaced it the same way all over the world. So 3 witnesses, when you talk about something sealed, and even though there's hope, but it's 2 or 3. And the other thing, George, is something happened with the president since the book came out that's linked to this, and that's what stunned me when my wife told me. And it's linked to the Harbinger that we haven't really kind of really gone into, which is the tower, and that is that the fourth harbinger in the book is this structure that rises. The Israelites say after this attack, we will rebuild and with stronger, and what they're saying is we're going to build bigger, higher,
bigger,
taller.
Better, you name it.
Exactly, and taller is part of it because you can build taller with these big stones. And so what happens is the nation embarks on this rebuilding campaign on the ground of destruction. So now we've got ground zero, and in one of the ancient translations of the Bible, it's called the Septuagint. It's the first one ever made. It's in Greek, and the New Testament quotes from it. When they got to Isaiah 9:10, these ancient rabbis, they did an interesting thing. It says, the bricks have fallen, we will rebuild with hewn stone. But what they did is it says the bricks are fallen. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a tower. So they're speaking about a tower rising on the ground of destruction. So now, literally, a tower is rising on the ground of destruction. This is the harbinger that is continuing right now. Rising up, this tower that's going to be the symbol of America coming back stronger, but in this spirit of defiance. And the thing is that where they got that from is they quoted the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, where they were saying, "Come, let us build a tower." And you see, like in end time prophecy, you see that Babylon is very, very clear. That comes from the Tower of Babel. So they're linking these two things together. So the only two places in the ancient translation you'll find this statement is Genesis 11, Tower of Babel, and Isaiah 9:10, the Harbinger scripture. Now, there's something I didn't know when I wrote the book, even though I put the figure of the Tower of Babel, and that is there was actually a scripture hidden in Ground Zero. And this didn't make the news for some reason, but it was hidden there. There was a Bible that was there in the ruins. It was blown apart, and there was one page left. And a photographer goes into the ruins, and he's one of the official photographers, and he takes a picture, and then they kind of whisk him out because of danger. He goes and he looks at what he took, and he literally starts weeping. And I spoke to the man to confirm this. He's weeping as he reads it. What was the scripture that was hidden in Ground Zero? The scripture was, "Come, let us build for ourselves a tower." The same scripture of Babel, of the building of a tower, and of Isaiah 9:10 in the ancient translation. The very thing, that's what was hidden. And this year, since I wrote the book, since the Harbinger came out, the tower is continuing to rise, and everybody's waiting. Like, when is it going to break the barrier and become the tallest building again, surpassing the Empire State Building in New York City? And it happened on April 30th, and there was news all over the country focused. Interesting, because in the Harbinger, the date is already given. April 30th is already given in the Harbinger as the date linked to Ground Zero. And then the president, this is probably 3 months after we spoke last year, the president goes down to Ground Zero, and he sees this tower, and they show him a beam, and the beam is going to be the final closing on the Harbingers, on the tower. It's going to be the last thing up there. And they sit him down, and they say, write some words. Now he can write anything he wants. And remember, the paraphrase of Isaiah 9:10 in English form, American modern, is, "We will rebuild, we'll come back stronger." The president takes out his pen, writes on the beam of the Harbinger, he writes, "We rebuild, we come back stronger." The same words that the commentaries use to translate Isaiah 9:10. He writes it on the beam. It's going to be the highest words in America when it gets up there in the top. And when you look at the ancient vow of Israel that brought destruction, it was in Hebrew, it's only 8 Hebrew words that brought destruction to Israel. The president adds 2 words on that beam, so it ends up being 8 English words of the vow, and they even match up. I mean, eerily, like word for word. I mean, so the things this is just it keeps on continuing. The signs of the judgment and warning keep on happening.
These synchronicities that are out there, and there are obviously many. You've talked about them here. Why do they happen?
Well, I believe, without any question, God's in charge of everything. Every event, He's in charge of. And number one, and number two, that's how He shows, in a sense, the hand or a message in it. When the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 A.D., it was destroyed on the exact same day by the Romans that it had been destroyed by the Babylonians, centuries before. Now, nobody was planning it. The Babylonians weren't around anymore. They were gone. So how did it happen? Why does it happen like that? Why did these things happen? Why did most of the things that happened with Jesus happen on Hebrew holy days? Why? Because it's showing you a sign. It's really the sign of God behind all these things, and that there's a purpose. And that even goes with, what I'll tell you something that happened. This is dramatic, and in my own life, and linked to this is that, I mentioned how this thing even became a book. In the Bible, how does God get a word out? He always does it by His hand. If He's getting a word out to a nation, He does it in a dramatic way. Well, in the book, when I wrote The Harbinger, it's done in the form of, even though it's all fact, but it's framed in a narrative about a prophet who is revealing these mysteries through these 9 seals. And so it begins with, in a sense, a man sits down in a public place, and to his left is this prophet who turns to him, starts talking, then he prophesies over him. It's going to lead the man to write a book that's going to give a prophetic word to America. Okay, that's the stage. Now, a few years ago, there was a Super Bowl, And people who are into the Super Bowl know that it was called the greatest play in Super Bowl history. A man named David Tyree, and New York Giants. He jumps up into the air, he catches his ball, pins it to his helmet in midair, gets tackled, changes the game. The greatest play in Super Bowl history. What people don't know, the story kind of behind the story, is that David Tyree is a passionate Christian, and he was praying that he always wanted to spread the word, and before he went into that game, he was given a prophecy, a prophetic word, and he went in that game knowing that something was going to happen that was going to bring him into the spotlight, and even the idea of making this catch. So he was in that game. People don't know the story behind the story. He was in the game with a supernatural thing. More than one person had given him this prophecy that this was going to happen. So he ended up, it happened. He wrote a book, and he mentioned the guy who gave him the prophecy. Okay, now.
Hold on for a second. Let's let you finish that story, Jonathan, when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. And, of course, we're going to take your phone calls this hour with Jonathan Cahn as we talk about his work, The Harbinger, End Times. That's where we are, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to Coast. We're going to take your calls this hour as well. Jonathan, of all the work that you did, was there something that stuck out that was very surprising to you?
Well, most of it, the things that kind of blew me away were when I pressed the computer button when I was looking for Isaiah 9:10, and instead of getting the scripture, I got the Annals of Congress that this was actually proclaimed. I had no idea. When I saw the Shemitah, that the incredible, convergence of all these things, and of course the mystery ground, and again I live around there, so that was to see it and actually be there, amazing, And I mean, it was a process of being blown away several times, And the last part was when this actually became a book, and that was that and the conclusion is that I had just finished writing it, and I again it as a heavy word, kind of flowed out. I just as if the book was already written. It was the easiest thing I ever did, George. I mean, it literally just flowed out. And when I finished, I didn't know what to do with it, but I had no doubt that this was God and this was to go forth. But I had no idea what to do, and never writing a book before. So I'm on a plane, and I'm heading to Dallas. I'm supposed to speak there, but I'm on a cross flight in Charlotte Airport. And I sit down in the airport, and I bow my head, and I say, Lord, the Harbinger is your word. You want to get it out to America that it's heard. You have to do it your way, by your hand, and no other way, not by people's plans. You just do it by your hand. I open up my eyes. I look to my left, and there's a man sitting to my left, kind of just like in the book. There's a man sitting to my left. He turns to me. He never saw me before. He says, so what's the good word? And I said, God loves you. And he says, I know that. He says, but what's the good word? And he begins, just like in the book, he turns and he begins to literally speak prophetically, prophesy over me. He says, you are going to publish a book. This is going to be a big thing. It's of God. It's going to change your life. It's going to go across America. This is God's doing. And he goes through this whole thing. And it turned out this man is the same man who gave the prophecy to David Tyree of the Super Bowl. And because that David Tyree wrote a book and mentioned this guy's name, this guy was brought in touch with a very large publisher, Christian books, and he sent word about what happened at the airport. So I didn't do a thing. He sent word to the president. I get a call from the president and he says, listen, we have no idea what this Harbinger thing is. We don't know what it's about, but we heard what happened at the airport, and we're interested. And that's how The Harbinger became a book.
Super. And right before the break, we were talking about the Super Bowl. You want to finish that story about Terrell?
Yeah, with David Tyree. And that
Tyree.
Yeah, if it wasn't for him, this is the guy who prophesied that gave him that word. And, he made this amazing thing that happened. And they talk about predestination. If that didn't happen, this thing wouldn't have happened at the airport, and The Harbinger wouldn't have been published that way. So it happened totally, by a supernatural intervention that actually paralleled what's in the book. So that whenever you see a Harbinger out there, it happened through that meeting. That's it. I didn't do anything. I never went to a publisher. All I did was bow my head.
Okay, let's go to the phones now. We'll pick it up by going to Brunswick, Georgia. Jim, east of the Rockies. Hey, Jim, go ahead.
How you doing, George?
Good, Jim. Thank you.
Let me just say that I happened to listen to your program when you had Paola Harris on.
Yeah.
And I was so fascinated. First time I listened to you, and I went out and got 2 of her books, and I was reading the one called Connecting the Dots. And this is about the UFO, meaning, and in there she has, and I just read this, and while I was thinking about the program you have now with Jonathan, and just fascinating information, there is a chapter she included, and it talks about, the title is Transition from Fourth to Fifth World, the Thunder Beings Return. And it's by Richard Bolin. And it talks about the Native American Star Knowledge Conference, in which this gentleman, who was the Oglala spiritual elder, looks for buffalo, Floyd Hand. And he revealed this, I'll just quote,
okay,
that ancient prophecies are now coming true. These prophecies, heralding immense changes for humankind, point to the imminent return of the star nations, what the white man would call extraterrestrial cultures. Now, this article that she included in this book goes in there, and it talks about thunder beings, about the 9 worlds that we pass through, and we are in the 4th going into the 5th. And she also, in this article, is included the great purification period that we have to go through. And lo and behold, I'm reading this and listening to Jonathan, and I'm saying, you know, the ancient cultures, the Lakota and the Hopi, they had prophecies that are very similar to what the detail and the fascination that Jonathan's talking about. And I said, I have just got to call. And so that's the reason I'm calling, that it just fascinated me. And I couldn't help but go back to Paula's book, to that chapter, because there's a lot more information. I only gave you the introduction to it, but it goes into specifics about events that happen, hurricanes. It talks about all kinds of volcanoes erupting and the ecology and all. So anyway, that's why I was calling. I really appreciate you taking my call.
You are very welcome. We didn't talk a lot about natural disasters, Jonathan, but are they there too?
Yes. One of the sections of the Harbinger is exactly that. Is how does judgment come? How does shaking come in? And there's a pattern of that, and it can happen. You know, one of the ways of this is natural disasters. Another is man-made disasters. Breaking down of economic infrastructure, division, military defeat. There's a whole pattern of that, how it happens, and one of them is absolutely natural disasters.
The last pope, the prophecy of St. Malachi. Have you looked at that?
Yeah, interesting. And it's I'm sure you've spoken about it, but it's interesting stuff that in Malachi, at least with the last few popes, and again, this is not biblical prophecy, so I can't say everybody has to make up their mind with this. But interesting, with John, he says pastor a nauta, shepherd and sailor, and that kind of goes. He was a shepherd, and he's from Venice, of sailors, and with John Paul, I'm sure you've known this, from the mist of the moon, and he comes there on the half moon and is there for a month. And John Paul II with a labor of the sun, he's called, and he's born with an eclipse, and his funerals with the eclipse of the sun, onward. And so the last one, Petrus Romanus, I have a friend who wrote a book on that. And very interesting. I mean, if this is true, he's the last pope, and they said, well, he's from Argentina. Well, his parents were from Rome, or from Italy. But interesting about it, I'll say one thing is that if he is the last pope, where, it says he will feed his flock among many tribulations, after which the seven-hilled city will be destroyed. Well, that does parallel, actually, biblical prophecy, which speaks of persecution at the end. That's there. And also speaks of tribulation, and it speaks of the destruction of the seven-hilled city. That's all in the book of Revelation. So it is interesting. It's something that everybody has to make up their mind, but it is interesting.
No doubt about that. Okay, whose turn now? First time, Mike in Minneapolis. Go ahead, Michael.
Hey, how you doing, George?
Good, Mike.
Excellent. I just kind of wanted to talk about kind of like prophecies and kind of setting yourself and believing them coming true. I think a lot of these things can be actually being orchestrated by the global elite, kind of playing out their own type of Babylonian prophecies as they bring about their, what am I trying to say here? Kind of playing it out on their own.
Like a script.
Yes, like a lot of these economic situations. And as far as like some of the more crazier coincidences that kind of go along with it, some of these people, they understand the nature of reality, how you can manipulate it and create things to happen just by simply putting energy towards it, or these rituals or whatever have you.
Well, that's possible. It's possible that these things are out there, could occur. Only the future knows these days, Jonathan. What do you think?
Yeah, well, the key here is, I would say that it keys in on this ancient scripture, and a scripture that not a lot of people have a vested interest in any more than ancient Israel did. I mean, it happened with Israel, happened in the exact way, and according to the prophets, before, that, so it didn't involve anything else at that point. So, because of all that, there is a real prophetic message that links to this. The Bible, I'd say, is greater than that.
Much greater than that.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. So over the next couple of years, other signs, what should we look for?
One is, I believe, one of the first things, and this is one of the first things in prophecy, and the signs in progression, is that you would see, one is that the removal of America's crown as head of nations. We spoke of, before, one of the mystery of the Shemitah, and one thing there's a thing in there, because in Hebrew, Shemitah can mean release, like the year of release, but it actually also means to let collapse or let fall. And the message in there is that if America doesn't turn, that the blessings, are going to collapse, and which we've been watching. And the American age, as we know it, most of us were born into it. The American age, as we know it, will end with America as the head of nations, and that is one of the first things, I believe, or one of the earlier than later things we will see what we have known disappear.
Next up, we go west. Charles in Los Angeles. Hey, Charles, go ahead.
Blessing to you, George. First, I want to say something to you, George, before I talk to Jonathan. George, your intuition in regards to 2013 is right on. You are really being directed spiritually in gathering guests on your show that's preparing the psyche of these million listeners that you have that listen to Coast in preparation what is coming. I really want to compliment you on that.
We try. Thank you.
You do an excellent job. Jonathan,
yes.
You are definitely a child of light. I'm going to ask you a question. I had received several visions in regards to the 9/11 strike on the East Coast during the year 2001, and I tried desperately to stop it, and nobody believed me. The visions that I have now, I'm going to tell you the visions, and I'm going to ask you if this is what you have seen and if prayers can stop it. Number one, I saw San Francisco being destroyed by a tidal wave at least 4 or 5 miles high, and it's going to come during the nighttime, and it's going to be preceded by a wind of close to 200 miles an hour. Number two, George, you be careful when you go to Hawaii, especially the Big Island. I saw an asteroid coming across the United States at night.
Oh, boy.
A portion of it breaks off and hits in the northwest, but the largest portion of it strikes the east coast of the Big Island of Hawaii, causing a huge tidal wave to envelop those particular islands. But this is the most ominous of all. North Korea has been threatening the United States with a nuclear strike.
Yes.
God has shown me several years ago, between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning, a Black 4-stage nuclear missile coming across the Pacific in between Long Beach and Palos Verdes, striking Los Angeles and destroying an area 20 to 30 miles in radius that looks like the landscape of the moon with the magma in the middle shooting up. Now, since February the 15th, I have sent letters with this vision to President Obama, to the Chairman, Joint Chief of Staff, General Martin Dempsey.
And I bet no response, right?
Wait, hold on a second. I'm going to tell you. To the mayor of Los Angeles, to the FBI in Los Angeles, the police chief in Los Angeles, the fire chief of Los Angeles, and Vandenberg Air Force Base, and Camp Pendleton, and you're exactly right. No response. This thing is about to happen. George Nuri's show, Coast to Coast, has allowed me to say this. I want to ask you, can prayers create an iron shield of protection over Los Angeles and the West Coast to prevent this disaster? Because if this thing strikes, 4 million people are lost. And, George?
Let's see if that happens. What do you think, Jonathan?
Well, I would say a prayer can't do a shield against God's will, but prayer can definitely change things. And there either is in the Bible, it goes again and again. There are times when this calamity was falling, and prayers did change it. I mean, so yes, I mean prayers can absolutely affect it. Interesting that
we know it works.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, and I mean it says we pray if we pray along His will, and the will is for mercy. And I know several people who had this vision of 9/11 before it happened, and pretty much nobody listened. And that's because it's deeper than just it's the course of the nation. So I think you've said it, and people take note, and the judgment can come in those ways. And yes, we need to pray,
and we have to pray pretty darn hard, don't we?
Yes. Absolutely. One of the key messages, and that even links to the part where about the mystery ground. There's actually a scripture that goes along with that mystery there, and it is the one. It says this: "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their own evil ways, I'll hear from heaven. I'll forgive their sin, and I'll heal their land." And that is a key in the Bible. If my people and prayer.
Are you scared of the Harbinger?
I'm not because George. I mean, I would be if I was out. If I didn't know where I was with God. I mean, I would be. But because I don't have a question about that. Not because of anything on me, but because I know the refuge I'm in. I don't, because the main thing, and people say to me, should I build a bomb shelter? Should we do this? And I'm not saying to do or not do, but I will say one thing. In Hebrew, the word for safety is Yeshua, and Yeshua is also the name of Jesus. And the main thing is be right with God, and you don't have to be fearing at night. Just make sure you're right. Make sure that's the main thing.
What if you're not right? What happens to you?
If you're not right, I would fear.
You would.
That's
pretty strong coming from a former atheist, huh?
Absolutely, yeah. But a former atheist who was hit by a locomotive train, So yes, so absolutely. I would. The thing is, there's a thing that says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If I wasn't in God, if I didn't know that, I would be afraid. But the fear, not to stay in fear, but to get right with God. Get into Him. Because there's nothing stronger, there's nothing safer. And again, the Bible's all about salvation. It's about being safe, being saved, get right with God. Get right, and again, the name for safety is the same name, happens to be Jesus.
We're going to come back in just a moment with Jonathan. We're going to take final phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. I'll tell you what's in store for our Thursday night program as well. So those of you on hold in California, Michigan, Maryland, Minnesota, just stay with us. We'll be right back. On our next Coast to Coast program, we're going to have a split show for you. We're going to talk about Atlantis for a couple hours, followed by the Magnesium Miracle, a little bit of health for you. So we've got just about everything but the kitchen sink on our next Coast to Coast show. We'll be back with final phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. When you wrote the Harbinger, you communicated it through the story of a prophet. How did you set that up, Jonathan?
Well, originally I wrote it like straight out. I wrote it as factual as it came to me.
Yeah.
And then it was led, there's deep things in the Harbinger, and to do it in a way that would would communicate and reach more people, make it easy to understand, and almost without even trying, that you start absorbing it. And it just kind of hit me in one day, and that in the Bible there are stories used and imageries used to communicate truth. So once I did that, I took the figure of the prophet representing all the prophets of the Bible. Some people ask me, "Are you the prophet? Are you Noriel, the guy who gets the revelation?" And it's kind of splitting up my voice in this. And I took the symbol of the seals, and there actually are biblical seals. There's actually the seal that starts all the mysteries and ends it at the end is actually a real seal from the prophet Jeremiah that they just discovered. So I took that as if there were a prophet, living from the Bible today in New York City, and then did it in this way, and so people who wouldn't in any other way be able to receive this are able to receive it.
Jonathan, as this all begins to unfold and we have this finite period, the caller prior talked about prayer, the ability to try to slow things down, stop them. We do have that right, don't we?
Absolutely. And it's one of the things. I believe. This kind of goes with the whole thing. I don't believe there would be, again, the Harbingers or warnings or this book if there weren't hope and if there weren't. This is really a call to prayer. I kind of alluded to it earlier on that we've actually gotten contact from people in the Congress, and one very, very famous member of Congress got in touch with us. Had read the book, and these people who are reading the book or seeing the DVD, they read the Harbinger, and said, "We have to do something. We have to pray for America." And this member of Congress came down, met me and met some of us in New York City. We went to the sites of the Harbinger. If you can picture this, someone from Congress, they literally bowed on bended knee when they saw something that happened to one of the Harbingers. Then they took us to the Capitol, and we prayed inside there. And there are people in leadership who are actually praying. I've talked to a general who's praying, and so that is the whole point. Yeah, we have not only the right. This is a call for that. That's the point. And God's got a mercy. That's the whole point.
Okay, let's take the final calls here. We'll go to Minneapolis. Vince is with us on the wild card line. Hello, Vince.
Hi there. I'm not in totally agreement with his thoughts of biblical end times, but if I could ask the person a question.
Of course.
And I think I might speak also for the majority of the callers. I think his definition of terrorists is different than the listeners. I think he might be thinking that the terrorists is Islamic extremists, or maybe their listeners are more in line thinking that the terrorists are like world bankers and the Wall Street. So he might be a little bit political, partial towards a certain nation on this planet.
Well, let me say, it's the Harbinger is not about a certain nation or anything as such, and it's a call. It doesn't, and regardless of what one feels about, the causes behind something. The fact is, all these things are used, and this was a wake-up call, and listen, we're all living in this world, and our time is going to end, and we have to get right. So it doesn't matter. Forget about politics. That the Harbinger is not a political book. It's a spiritual book, and it's a revelation of something that is affecting all of us, that already happened once, and it's happening again, and this is the call.
Next up, Nathan in Charlotte, North Carolina, East this time. Hi, Nathan.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good, Nathan.
Yeah, I heard, the other guy calling in about a vision. Well, I've had a vision, and in my vision, it was in June of 1998, I saw people on the altar, and they were praying, and the word birth came into my mind. And I also saw a date. I'm not going to say what month, but it was on the 23rd. And then God showed me Habakkuk 2:3, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak. Though it tarries, wait for it, or it will not tarry, but it will surely come to pass. And, I think with all these things, what God was showing me, there's an end and a beginning. And we're approaching the end and the beginning. And I was fasting and praying in 2008 in the election year, and I seen the number 44. And I didn't know what 44 meant. I went online and was looking at BibleWheel.com, and it said 44 meant birth. And I thought, the next president was going to be the 44th president, which is Obama.
Well, interesting take about it. It's amazing, Jonathan, at how many people are having these prophetic feelings.
Yeah, and it's actually to me it's been more and more what I've seen. By the way, you said 4:04. Right now it's 4:44 in Eastern Standard Time. So, but yes, it's I've noticed that more and more, and I think there's a reason for that. A lot of times when something is going to happen, people are warned.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah,
that is true too. Do you believe that you have to be a believer, spiritual, in order to understand all this?
I believe, I believe that I don't think you have to be a believer to be warned and to get the message, to get the overall message. But I think to get the the fullness of it, I think that's kind of a process with that. But I think this is the Harbinger is a call to believers and to non-believers alike. And it is not to preaching to the choir. And I think the reason why it's gone forth in America is because it's going to people who are not believers. So I don't think you have to be a believer to hear kind of a trumpet call or a warning and saying wake up and get right. So I don't think you have to. I'll say that. I mean, there are things in it that are deep, but I don't think you have to get the overall message.
John is in Niles, Michigan on the wild card line. Hey, John, thanks for calling.
Hey, not a problem, George. How are you doing this morning?
Good, thank you.
Good. I just want to start off by saying great show tonight, both you and Jonathan.
Thanks.
Now, my question is, you said previous in the show that New York used to be the old capital of the United States when George Washington was president. And when they dedicated the United States there at Ground Zero, did they actually have a national historical marker about that, or how did people find out about that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it actually the place where they dedicated America to God, or that ground, it still exists. It's the oldest building in use in New York City. It's a little stone chapel right there at the corner of Ground Zero that actually was part of the whole land there, and it's called St. Paul's Chapel, and there is a marker that says that. And it's interesting that it's absolute history. And if you go inside, you'll find a place where Washington prayed. And there's a plaque there where at the beginning he says, "O Lord, keep America in your holy protection." So here it is right at Ground Zero, and you can look at it two ways. One is that's where the protection, in a sense, was lifted. On the other hand, all the buildings around Ground Zero were destroyed or ruined completely except one. There was only one that was protected. They called it the miracle of 9/11. And the one building that was protected was that little stone chapel where they dedicated America to God. And the reason why they said it was protected is because there was an object that absorbed the force of 9/11 and protected that chapel. And the object was the Harbinger. It was the sixth Harbinger. It was the sycamore. And so really the message, even in that, is that the point of this is not to condemn America, it's to save it. That's the whole point of the Harbingers. But yes, you can go there. In fact, George, a lot of people since the book are going there. They, from around the country. And you go there, you'll see the chapel, you go in the backyard, and you'll see where the sycamore was, you'll see where the other tree that was planted was, and you'll see the Harbingers actually appeared on that ground. So that's another thing. But yes, it's right there in New York City to this day.
How many capitals have we had? New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., just those three, or did we have any others?
Yeah, since the Continental Congress, or since actually America began as a nation, a fully formed nation, it was first New York City in 1789, and then it was Philadelphia, and then it was Washington.
Why'd they keep moving around?
Well, that's a good question. I think that a lot of people don't want to stay in New York City. And then secondly, that then they were building the Capitol there. And actually, George, I've been asked to go into the Capitol and speak, in the next 2 months regarding this. So,
are you going to do that?
But it's all kind of linked together.
Are you going to go?
Oh yeah. In fact, I was asked to. In the day of the president's inauguration, I was asked to speak at the inaugural prayer breakfast, And I was asked that morning, I was asked to speak about the Harbinger. So, I mean, that itself was a harbinger that on that morning I was giving the whole message there in Washington, D.C.
Did you go?
Oh yeah, I was. Yeah, I went and I didn't hold back. I mean, I said it, and it was they asked me to do the keynote address at that presidential inaugural breakfast, which is just before Obama was sworn in, and it's weird because in the Harbinger, you have that mystery that links up with that first inauguration and the prayer gathering. So here, this was the prayer gathering now. So I knew it was a God thing, so I couldn't say no.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And was the president there?
No, he was busy getting ready.
Why do they call it a presidential inaugural prayer breakfast and he's not there?
I agree. I agree. But they did have, there was a senator on stage with me. There was the chaplain of the House, and there was a congressman. All that. There were people in government who heard it, and then it went viral. It's gone viral on the web. About over 1 million people have seen that speech.
I do meet and greets around the country. I've got one coming up in May in Columbus, Ohio. Haven't been there for that, so this is going to be fun. But how could it be a meet and greet with me if I don't show up?
These are mysteries that I can't even get into.
Let's go to Art in Los Angeles, California. Hello there, Art. Go ahead.
Hey, John. I Googled you, man. I was looking up your book, and that is a glorious beard, brother.
Thank you. Well, it comes with the territory, right?
Yeah, no. But my comment / question is, George, I'm a Coast Insider. I pay for a year in advance. Really big fan. Listen to the show.
Great.
Initially, when I signed up for it, the goal was to listen to it while I drive and in the car. And before, the app was kind of broken, and they just updated it. And I don't know how, but they managed to make it worse.
Which one? What kind of phone do you have?
I've got the iPhone.
Oh my God! I get 9 out of 9. I get 99 out of 100 comments. They love this now. You have to have a certain operating system.
No, it's not that. You can't listen to old art episodes. It shuts off all the time.
No. Don't. The app is not a replacement for the website. I don't want to get into that. Call me on Friday for that. But that's what you got the website for. You go to the website as a Coast Insider. You can get all that. That's all I'll say about that for now.